He grew up in a small, crowded apartment with walls that seemed to close in on him. The buildings smelled faintly of bleach and old pipes, a smell he had come to associate with home. His father, a janitor at a nearby hospital, worked long hours cleaning floors, scrubbing bathrooms, and picking up after people who barely noticed his presence. Despite the exhaustion etched on his father's face each evening, he always smiled when he saw his son. The boy watched him closely. He saw the rough hands, the worn shoes, and the tired eyes. But he also saw something stronger and unshakable determination. His father always made time for him, even if it was just a few minutes before bedtime, sitting on the edge of the small bed and asking about school, friends, and dreams. The boy loved those moments. They felt like a shield against the world that often looked down on him. School was another story. Teachers rarely expected much from him because of his background. Some classmates mocked his clothes, his lunch, the way he spoke. They didn't see the quiet strength inside him, but he had learned from his father that kindness and patience were not weaknesses. Every time someone laughed at him or sneered, he remembered his father's words. One day, you'll stand face to face with anyone, and nothing will scare you. He clung to that promise. It became a guiding light, a quiet voice in the back of his mind whenever the world seemed heavy. He studied hard, often staying up after everyone else had gone to sleep, reading borrowed books and practicing math problems by the dim light of a small lamp. His father never asked for him to be anything but himself, but the boy wanted to make him proud. The apartment was small, and money was always tight. There were nights when dinner was just a bowl of rice or a sandwich made from die-old bread, but the boy never complained. He learned to be grateful for what little they had. He saw the sacrifices his father made skipping meals, taking extra shifts, never complaining so that he could have shoes that fit and books to read. It was a lesson in humility and hard work that no school could teach. There were quiet moments that stayed with him. Early mornings when his father left for work before the sun had risen, and he would watch him through the window, silhouetted against the dim streetlights. He would see his father pick up his cleaning cart, adjust his uniform, and head into the cold, empty streets, ready to face another long day. The boy would lie back in bed feeling both pride and longing, wishing he could take away the weight his father carried. On weekends, when the janitor came home exhausted but still smiling, they would walk to the park together. It was their small escape from the concrete and noise of the city. The boy would run ahead, laughing, and his father would watch, his eyes softening as he saw the joy that money or status could never buy. Sometimes they would sit on a worn bench, sharing a simple meal from a brown paper bag, and talk about dreams. The boy would talk about becoming someone who could help others, someone who could stand up even when the world tried to push him down. He had a notebook where he wrote down his thoughts, his dreams, and the lessons his father had taught him. Every page was filled with reminders of hope, perseverance, and courage. He scribbled, "One day, I will show the world what I can do," and then underlined it over and over until the words seemed to glow on the paper. The neighborhood was rough. Broken glass lined some streets, and stray dogs wandered in packs. He had seen fights break out over nothing, seen neighbors argue, seen people ignore the pain of others. It was easy to feel small and powerless. But the boy learned to navigate it, to observe and listen, to understand that strength was often quiet and steady, not loud or violent. He carried that wisdom like a shield. One day he came home from school with tears in his eyes. Some boys had laughed at him for wearing shoes that were too big, handed down from a cousin. The ridicule stung, but he didn't cry in front of anyone. Instead, he ran to his father, who was sweeping the floor. Without looking up, his father said, "Hey, champ. Rough day?" He nodded, voice catching. His father put down the broom and pulled him close. "Do you know why I work so hard?" his father asked. The boy shook his head. "It's not for me. It's for you. So you can face anything, no matter who stands in front of you. Promise me you'll never let someone else's words make you feel small. Promise me you'll keep your head high." The boy nodded, and his father smiled, brushing a hand over his hair. "One day you'll stand face to face with anyone, and nothing will scare you. Do you believe me?" He nodded again, more firmly this time. That moment stayed with him, etched into his memory. It became a silent promise between father and son, one that guided every decision. Every challenge, every moment of doubt. School continued to be tough, but he no longer feared the laughter or the whispers. Instead, he focused on learning, on growing, on preparing for a future where he could show the world his worth. He found teachers who believed in him, mentors who offered guidance, and books that opened his mind to possibilities he had never imagined. Every night, he would tell his father about what he had learned, and the janitor would listen, proud but humble, always reminding him to stay grounded. There were other kids who had money, who had luxuries he could only dream of, but he never envied them. He envied their ease, but not their character. He envied the doors that opened for them, but not the lessons they sometimes ignored. He knew that one day, the work he put in, the patience, the resilience, would matter more than any privilege. He clung to the promise, using it as armor against fear and doubt. Time passed, and the boy grew stronger, not just in mind but in spirit. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that came from knowing he had faced hardship and had chosen courage over fear. His father watched with pride as his son walked taller, spoke with clarity, and treated others with respect, even when they didn't deserve it. The janitor knew that he had planted a seed, one that would grow into something powerful. The small apartment continued to be their world, filled with laughter, lessons, and dreams. The smell of bleach and old pipes remained, but it no longer felt confining. It felt like a home built on love, hard work, and promises kept. And every night, before drifting off to sleep, the boy would think of the words his father had spoken, repeating them in his mind, feeling their weight and their warmth. One day, you'll stand face to face with anyone, and nothing will scare you. That promise became his guide, his motivation, and his quiet strength. It was the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond the narrow streets and crowded rooms of his childhood. It was the start of a story that would prove that courage, heart, and perseverance could overcome any obstacle. And deep down, he knew that his father's belief in him was the most powerful gift of all, one that would carry him through every challenge, every trial, and every step toward the person he was meant to become as the boy grew older. He became more aware of the world around him. School was still challenging, but now he faced it with a sense of purpose. He wanted to learn, to grow, to prove not to anyone else, but to himself, that he could rise above the limitations placed on him by circumstance. His father's words echoed in his mind constantly. One day, you'll stand face to face with anyone, and nothing will scare you. They were not just words. They were a promise he had made to himself to keep. He began to see the differences between himself and some of the other students more clearly. While others had money, cars, and trips during holidays, he had worn shoes and hand-me-down clothes. But he refused to let that define him. Instead, he studied harder, stayed later in the library, and asked questions whenever he could. He listened to teachers, absorbed knowledge, and began to realize that his background did not limit his potential. It only made him stronger. His father noticed the change. Even with his long hours at the hospital, he made time to encourage him. "You're doing well, son," he said one evening as he polished the hallway floor. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Keep learning. Keep growing. Remember your promise." The boy nodded, a quiet determination settling into him. He felt the weight of the promise more than ever. It was becoming a driving force in his life. One day, the boy saw something that would change the way he thought about the world. A neighbor, older and sickly, was struggling with a simple task, carrying groceries up a flight of stairs. The boy didn't hesitate. He ran to help, lifting bags and easing the burden. The woman smiled at him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, young man," she said. Not everyone would do this. He realized in that moment that helping others, even in small ways, carried a quiet power. It was a power that no wealth or status could replace. High school brought new challenges. The classes were harder, the workload heavier, and the social pressures stronger. But he had learned resilience. He faced bullying with calm confidence, refusing to let cruel words penetrate his spirit. He helped classmates who struggled, shared notes, and encouraged those who felt small. Slowly, people began to notice not just his intelligence, but his character. One of his teachers, noticing his dedication and curiosity, suggested he look into medical studies. At first, the boy hesitated. He had always admired doctors and surgeons, but the idea of entering such a prestigious field seemed far beyond reach. Still, he remembered his father's promise and his own commitment to rise above obstacles. He began to dream bigger, researching schools, scholarships, and opportunities he never imagined were possible. Meanwhile, his father continued to work tirelessly. Nights were long, days exhausting, but he always returned home with a smile for his son. Sometimes he would sit down after a long shift, exhaustion lining his face, say, "Remember, son, your work ethic matters more than anything else. Don't be afraid to face challenges head-on." These words sank deep into the boy's mind. He understood that success was not just about talent. It was about perseverance, integrity, and courage. The boy started volunteering at clinics and small hospitals, watching doctors work, learning procedures, and listening to patients. He was fascinated by the way they could save lives, the calm precision in their hands, and the empathy in their words. He realized that being a doctor was more than a job. It was a responsibility, a chance to make a real difference, and he wanted to embrace that responsibility fully. Financial struggles remained a constant shadow. Tuition fees, books, and exam costs were daunting, but he refused to give up. He applied for scholarships, worked part-time jobs, and stayed up late studying after long shifts at the local store. Every obstacle became a test of his resolve. And every time he felt weary, he remembered his father's words and the promise that had guided him since childhood. One day, a medical conference was held in the city. Young aspiring students were invited to observe surgeries and listen to experienced doctors speak. The boy managed to secure a spot despite the cost, knowing it was a rare opportunity. There, he saw a surgeon who was famous for both skill and influence. The surgeon's reputation was intimidating. Stories of arrogance and strictness had reached even the school corridors. Some students admired him, while others feared him. The boy felt a mix of awe and nervousness. This was someone he might one day meet face to face. And the promise his father had given him echoed in his mind. He could not be scared. During the conference, the boy watched the surgeon perform a complex procedure with steady hands and unwavering focus. He observed every movement, every decision, and marveled at the precision. But he also noticed the surgeon's demeanor, cold, authoritative, and sometimes dismissive toward young students who asked questions. The boy felt a pang of anxiety. Would he ever be able to impress someone like this? Would he be taken seriously? He remembered the promise and took a deep breath. One day, he would meet this kind of person without fear, promised himself. School exams came, and with them, the pressure to perform. His dedication paid off. He scored high marks, earning recognition and scholarships. His father's eyes filled with pride when he saw the results. "I knew you could do it," he said quietly, pulling his son into a brief hug. "I'm proud of you, and this is only the beginning." The boy smiled, feeling the weight of both responsibility and possibility. The journey to medical school was not easy. He faced long application processes, interviews, and rigorous exams. He studied every day, often sacrificing sleep, comfort, and social time. But he was driven by the vision of standing tall in the face of challenges. A vision shaped by years of struggle and guided by a promise. Every rejection letter was a lesson, every small victory a step forward. Finally, the day came when he was accepted into a prestigious medical program. The moment was surreal. He called his father immediately, barely able to contain his excitement. "I did it," he said, voice trembling. "I'm going to medical school." His father chuckled softly, pride shining through his exhaustion. "I always knew you could. Remember, this is just the start. Keep your head high and your heart strong." The boy entered medical school with determination and humility. He found professors who challenged him, peers who inspired him, and experiences that tested him in ways he had never imagined. He studied late into the night, assisted in small procedures, and learned to communicate with patients with empathy and care. He realized that medicine was not just about skill, but about understanding, patience, and human connection. In the hospital, he met the surgeon he had seen at the conference. The first encounter was intimidating. The surgeon's sharp gaze and confident presence could unsettle anyone, but the boy remembered his father's promise. He stood tall, asked thoughtful questions, and observed keenly. The surgeon initially dismissed him, but the young man's dedication and careful attention began to draw notice. He realized that respect was earned, not demanded, and that true courage came from integrity and competence. The young man faced many long nights, difficult cases, and moments of self-doubt. But he carried the lessons of his childhood, the value of hard work, the strength of humility, and the power of a promise. He supported fellow students, helped patients with kindness, and never lost sight of the reason he chose this path. Every challenge became a chance to grow, every obstacle an opportunity to prove to himself that he was capable. Through it all, his father remained a steady presence, calling from time to time to offer encouragement. "Don't forget where you came from," he would say. "Your background makes you who you are. Never be afraid to face anyone, and never lose sight of kindness." The boy treasured these calls, feeling the weight of years of guidance and love. They reminded him that his journey was bigger than himself, a continuation of the sacrifices and lessons that had shaped him. The boy began to gain confidence in his abilities. He assisted in surgeries, learned from mistakes, and earned the respect of mentors. Patients trusted him, colleagues sought his insight, and the surgeon began to notice his determination and skill. The boy remembered the promise, holding it close as he navigated the complexities of medicine and human relationships. Every day was a test of endurance, patience, and character. But the young man never wavered. He knew that facing the surgeon with respect and confidence was not just about skill, but about being true to himself. He had grown from a boy who watched his father work tirelessly into someone who could face challenges head-on, someone who understood that courage, integrity, and perseverance mattered more than status or wealth. As he continued through his studies, he realized that the world was larger than he had imagined, filled with challenges, opportunities, and people who could either lift him or push him down. But he had the promise, the lessons, and the quiet strength instilled by his father. He knew that one day he would stand face to face with the surgeon and anyone else who doubted him, and he would do so without fear, carrying with him the values and determination that had guided him from the very beginning. Medical school had a rhythm that the young man had to learn quickly. Days started before sunrise and often stretched late into the night. The hospital smelled of antiseptic iron and endless possibility. Every corner of it held lessons, some small and some life-altering. He learned to balance books with patience, theory with practice, and patience with urgency. Every time he walked the corridors, he reminded himself of the promise his father had made to him years ago. "One day, you'll stand face to face with anyone, and nothing will scare you." The surgeon, known for his skill and dominance in the medical field, became more than just a distant figure. He was a presence in lectures, surgeries, and even in hallway conversations. The young man had heard stories of his sharp tongue, of the harshness with students who faltered, and the exacting standards he demanded. Many students admired him from afar, some feared him, and a few had tried to confront him only to leave humiliated. Yet the young man saw the surgeon not as a wall, but as a challenge. Every time he prepared for a shift or an observation, he carried the quiet determination that had been growing inside him since childhood. One day, he was assigned to assist in a procedure under the surgeon's supervision. It was a delicate operation, one that required precision, steady hands, and calm judgment. The young man felt a knot in his stomach. This was the moment that could define him in the eyes of the surgeon. He remembered the long nights of studying, the part-time jobs to pay for books, the days spent volunteering in clinics, and most importantly, his father's promise. Taking a deep breath, he focused entirely on the task at hand. The surgeon observed him critically, noting every movement, every hesitation, every question he asked. At first, there was a flicker of dismissal in the surgeon's eyes, as if he doubted the young man's capabilities. But as the procedure progressed, The young man's composure and skill became evident. He anticipated needs, handed instruments without hesitation, and maintained a calm presence even under pressure. The surgeon's gaze softened slightly, though he said nothing. The young man didn't speak, didn't seek praise. He let his actions speak for him. After the surgery, the surgeon offered brief but pointed feedback. "You've potential," he said, voice measured and precise. "Keep this up. Don't let distractions get in your way." The young man nodded, feeling a surge of pride. It wasn't full recognition, but it was acknowledgement from someone whose approval mattered greatly. As he walked out of the operating room, the weight of the moment pressed on him. This was more than just skill being tested. It was his character, his persistence, and his ability to rise above fear. Beyond the operating room, the young man faced the usual challenges of medical school. Exams, long hours, and personal sacrifices were constant companions. There were days when fatigue pressed on him like a heavy blanket, when doubts crept into his mind, whispering that he wasn't ready. That someone like him could never belong among the elite. But he remembered the quiet evenings with his father, the small apartment, and the unwavering belief in him. Every time fear threatened to overwhelm him, he repeated the words in his head, letting them steady his hands and sharpen his focus. Outside the hospital, life wasn't easy. Balancing schoolwork, volunteering, and part-time work meant that free time was rare. Friendships were tested, and social invitations often had to be declined. But he had a clear vision. Each sacrifice was a step toward the life he wanted, toward the ability to stand tall against anyone, and toward fulfilling the promise that had guided him since he was a boy. One evening, while studying in the hospital library, he overheard a conversation between two senior doctors discussing a high-profile case. A patient had come in with a rare condition, and the attending surgeons were debating the best course of action. The young man listened intently, absorbing every detail. Something in his mind clicked. He remembered a study he had read about a similar case, and quietly shared his insights. The room fell silent for a moment as the surgeons considered his suggestion. The surgeon, who had been part of the discussion, raised an eyebrow and nodded slightly. It was a small gesture, but it carried significance. The young man felt a mix of humility and validation. He was beginning to be seen. Slowly, not just as a student, but as someone who could contribute meaningfully. But it wasn't always easy. Some peers were competitive, some dismissive, and others openly skeptical of his abilities. There were moments of tension, late-night arguments about procedures, and the occasional harsh remark meant to undermine confidence. Each time, he held on to the lessons from home, the importance of patience, integrity, and courage. He learned to navigate conflict without losing his sense of self, to respond with calmness rather than anger, and to focus on the work, not the ego. The surgeon became both a challenge and a mentor, whether he realized it or not. He pushed the young man to think critically, act decisively, and maintain high standards. Every critique was an opportunity to learn, every observation a chance to improve. Slowly, the young man's confidence grew. He realized that fear could not control him. Skill, preparation, and character could. The promise his father had given him was no longer just words, was living through every action he took. During long nights on call, he encountered situations that tested not just his medical knowledge, but his ability to stay composed under pressure. Emergencies came without warning patients in critical condition, equipment failures, in moments when every second counted. The young man learned to trust his instincts while relying on the knowledge he had acquired. He realized that mistakes could be costly, but hesitation was worse. With each crisis he faced, his competence and calm demeanor earned the respect of the hospital staff, and slowly the surgeon. There were also moments of reflection. When he walked the hospital corridors alone after a long day, he thought about his father, the long hours of hard work, the lessons that had shaped him, and the sacrifices made in silence. Those thoughts fueled him, reminding him that every challenge he faced was part of a larger journey. He understood that success was not just about personal achievement. It was about honoring the hard work and belief of those who had come before him. One particular night, a patient came in with a complex condition that required immediate intervention. The young man noticed subtle signs that others had missed. He acted quickly, coordinating with nurses, preparing instruments, and assisting in the procedure. The surgery was successful, and the attending team praised his observation and decisiveness. The surgeon, standing nearby, gave a rare smile, a silent acknowledgement of the young man's capability. It was a milestone, a moment that reinforced the belief that he could face anyone with confidence. Outside the hospital, the young man maintained a life grounded in humility. He continued to visit his father, sharing stories of his day and listening to advice. He helped neighbors, volunteered in community clinics, and stayed connected to the values that had shaped him. He knew that true strength was not measured by skill alone, but by character, empathy, and the courage to stand firm in the face of challenge. He began to mentor younger students, sharing knowledge, guidance, and encouragement. He understood the importance of lifting others even while pursuing personal goals. The lessons he had learned from his father and from his own experiences became a source of inspiration for others. He realized that leadership was not about authority or recognition. It was about service, support, and integrity. As the months turned into years, the young man's skill and reputation grew. He faced increasingly complex procedures, challenging cases, and high-pressure situations. But he never lost sight of the promise that had carried him from childhood. Every step, every decision, every moment of courage was a reflection of the lessons he had learned and the values instilled in him by his father. He began to see the surgeon not as an obstacle, but as a benchmark, a standard to aspire to. Someone whose approval mattered not for validation, but as recognition of the hard work and character he had cultivated. The young man's relationship with the surgeon evolved from skepticism and dismissal to quiet respect. The surgeon began to test him with more complex tasks, and the young man responded with composure, intelligence, and empathy. Through it all, the young man remained humble. He knew that every success was built on countless small actions, lessons learned, and moments of perseverance. He understood that facing the surgeon, or anyone powerful, was not about intimidation or bravado, but about preparation, skill, and integrity. The promise from years ago had become a guiding principle, a steady anchor in a world full of uncertainty and challenge. As the young man continued to grow, he realized that the journey was not just about reaching the top, but about the person he had become along the way. He carried the lessons of his father, the struggles of his past, and the victories of his present as a foundation for the future. Every step was deliberate, every action thoughtful, and every encounter an opportunity to demonstrate the values that had shaped him. The surgeon, once a figure of fear, had become a mirror reflecting the young man's growth. He had faced challenges, learned from experience, and acted with integrity, earning a place of respect not just in the hospital but within himself. The young man had learned that true courage was quiet, consistent, and grounded in character. He had begun to understand that the promise his father made was not just a guide for facing others, it was a blueprint for living, for striving, for standing tall in the face of any challenge that life could present. Medical school was not what the young man had imagined. It was harder, longer, and more demanding than anything he had experienced. Each day was filled with lectures, labs, and endless hours in the hospital. The smell of antiseptic, the constant hum of machines, and the quiet beeping of monitors became a part of his life. At first, it was overwhelming. The workload was immense, the expectations high, and every mistake felt like a reflection of his past. As if the world was ready to remind him that he came from humble beginnings, he remembered his father's promise constantly. One day you'll stand face to face with anyone, and nothing will scare you. Those words were a shield. When classmates sneered at him for being slow or questioned his choices, he held his head high. When professors doubted him or offered harsh criticism, he listened carefully, learned, and improved. He knew fear would only hold him back, but courage, determination, and hard work could propel him forward. In the first year, he struggled with basic medical procedures. His hands shook during first attempts at drawing blood, and he felt clumsy with instruments. Some of the other students laughed quietly, some offered pitying looks, and a few ignored him entirely. He learned to ignore the whispers and to focus on the work. Late nights in the library and long hours practicing with peers slowly built his confidence. Each small success became a foundation for the larger challenges ahead. During this time, the surgeon he had heard so much about became a real presence. He was assigned to assist in rounds led by the surgeon, and the boy could feel the weight of the man's reputation in the room. Known for brilliance as well as strictness, the surgeon rarely gave praise, and his sharp eyes could intimidate even the most confident student. The young man felt the tension in his chest, but he took a deep breath and reminded himself of the promise. Fear was a luxury he could not afford. One afternoon, the surgeon invited him to observe a complicated procedure. The room was tense, the monitors blinking rapidly, and the patient's vital signs demanding full attention. The young man's heart raced, but he focused on every movement, every decision, every instruction. He anticipated the surgeon's needs, prepared instruments, and quietly adjusted to the flow of the surgery. The surgeon noticed. A slight nod, almost imperceptible, was all the acknowledgement he received, but it meant more than any words could convey. It was recognition of his competence and dedication. Outside of the hospital, life was still a challenge. Financial pressures were constant, and the young man worked part-time jobs to support his studies. He balanced shifts at a local store with long hours of studying, often sacrificing sleep and social life. Yet, he never complained. Each struggle was a lesson, each sacrifice a step toward his goals. The world he had been born into had limited resources, but it had not limited his dreams. He found solace in moments of reflection, often walking through quiet streets late at night. He thought about his father, the small apartment, and the countless sacrifices made to give him a chance. He realized that the hardships he faced were not burdens, but lessons. They taught him patience, resilience, humility, and the importance of integrity. Each challenge was shaping him into someone capable of facing anyone. Regardless of status or power, peer relationships were another challenge. Some students were competitive and dismissive, others supportive, but intimidated by his persistence. The young man navigated these social dynamics carefully. He helped those who struggled, shared knowledge freely, and stayed focused on his own growth. Slowly, respect grew around him. People began to see not just his knowledge, but his character, his dedication, patience, quiet strength. Clinical rotations brought new lessons and new pressure. The young man assisted in surgeries, observed patient care, and learned to make split-second decisions. Mistakes were unavoidable, but he learned to accept them, reflect, and improve. He began to understand the true responsibility of medicine, not just technical skill, but empathy, quick thinking, and unwavering composure. Each successful procedure, each calm response under pressure, reinforced his confidence. There were moments of doubt, of course. He questioned whether he belonged in the hospital, whether he could match the talent and skill of others who seemed so much more prepared. Yet each time fear arose, he recalled his father's promise and the long path he had traveled. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the choice to act despite it. The young man acted again and again, proving to himself that he could rise above anxiety and challenge. During one rotation, a patient arrived with a condition that the attending doctors had never encountered. The young man noticed subtle signs that others overlooked. He carefully brought his observations to the supervising team. At first, his suggestion was met with skepticism. But as the team reviewed the details, it became clear that his insight was valuable. The procedure was adjusted, and the patient stabilized. The surgeon, present during the evaluation, gave him a brief but meaningful nod. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of his skill, diligence, and potential. The young man also learned to handle criticism. The surgeon's evaluations were sharp, sometimes bordering on harsh, but he listened without defensiveness. He dissected every comment, learned from it, and improved. Others might have felt discouraged, but he thrived on the challenge. He understood that growth required discipline, humility, the willingness to learn, even when it was uncomfortable. Outside of his studies, he remained grounded. He visited his father whenever possible, sharing stories of his experiences, victories, and challenges. His father's eyes reflected pride and understanding. He continued to volunteer in clinics, assisting those who could not afford care. He realized that medicine was not only a profession, but a responsibility, a chance to serve and uplift others. His dedication to helping people reinforced his motivation, making every sacrifice worthwhile. Over time, his reputation grew. Doctors began to consult him, nurses trusted his judgment, and patients felt reassured by his calm presence. The young man had become more than a student. He was a reliable and respected part of the hospital team. The surgeon, who had initially seemed unreachable, now tested him with complex tasks, offering opportunities to demonstrate competence and decision-making. Each success strengthened his confidence and skill. He also began to mentor junior students, sharing what he had learned about patience, resilience, and clinical skill. He understood the importance of lifting others as he rose, fostering a supportive environment while maintaining high standards. He realized that true leadership in medicine came not from authority, but from knowledge, empathy, and integrity. Nights on call were long and exhausting. Emergencies arrived without warning, requiring rapid assessment and immediate action. The young man learned to stay calm, trust his training, and work efficiently. Each successful intervention reinforced his belief in his abilities. Mistakes were rare but instructive, teaching him humility and the importance of constant learning. Through it all, he carried his father's promise as a guiding principle. The surgeon gradually recognized his potential. Though rarely given direct praise, the surgeon's acknowledgement grew in subtle ways: a nod during surgery, a thoughtful glance, a request for his opinion. The young man understood that respect was earned, not freely given, and that the quiet recognition of a mentor could be more meaningful than public praise. Through the relentless challenges, the young man learned to balance confidence with humility. He understood that expertise alone was not enough. Character, patience, and compassion were equally important. Each encounter, whether with patients, peers, or supervisors, was an opportunity to demonstrate the values instilled by his father and cultivated through years of effort. By the end of this phase of his training, the young man had grown into a capable, compassionate, and confident individual. He could face high-pressure situations with calm resolve, communicate effectively with colleagues and patients, and maintain unwavering integrity. The promise that had guided him since childhood was no longer just a memory, it was lived experience. He had faced challenges that would have intimidated many and had emerged stronger, ready to meet whatever came next. He understood that the journey was ongoing. The path to mastery, to earning the full respect of the surgeon, and to realizing his potential would continue to present challenges. But he was no longer the timid boy who had once doubted himself. He was a young man forged through perseverance, guided by values, strengthened by the promise that had been his anchor through every hardship. And as he looked forward, he knew that he was ready to face the next great challenge. Whatever it might be, with courage, skill, and unwavering integrity, the young man's training had reached a point where every day felt like a test. He had learned to manage pressure, navigate complex cases, and gain respect from colleagues, but nothing had yet prepared him for the challenge that lay ahead. Word had come of a critical patient arriving at the hospital, someone whose condition was so complicated that only the most skilled and experienced surgeons could attempt the operation. The atmosphere in the hospital became tense, everyone moving quickly, coordinating for the impending procedure. The young man felt a surge of both excitement and apprehension. This was the moment that could define his future and show what all his years of hard work had truly meant. He remembered his father's words from years ago. "One day, you'll stand face to face with anyone, and nothing will scare you." The memory was vivid, almost like a light in the dark corridors of the hospital. He realized that this was that day, the test of courage and skill that his father had promised would come. Every decision he made now, every action, would reflect not just his knowledge, but the years of perseverance, integrity, and determination that had shaped him as preparations for surgery began. The young man assisted in organizing the operating room. He checked instruments, ensured everything was sterile, and reviewed the patient's history carefully. The surgeon, a figure of authority and respect, moved through the room, assessing every detail with sharp eyes. He gave instructions briskly, and the young man followed them carefully, knowing that even the smallest mistake could have consequences. Yet he felt calm, focused, and ready. He had spent years preparing for this, and the promise his father had given him was a steady anchor. The surgery began. Monitors beeped, lights reflected off stainless steel instruments, and the hum of the room was a constant presence. The young man assisted as best he could, anticipating needs, handing instruments, and observing every move the surgeon made. At one point, a complication arose. The patient's vitals dropped unexpectedly, and everyone in the room tensed. The surgeon acted swiftly, but he also glanced at the young man, expecting him to remain calm and respond without panic. Heart pounding, he followed the surgeon's directions with precision, adjusting equipment and preparing materials. He realized in that moment that courage was not about fearlessness, but about acting despite fear. Minutes felt like hours. Every decision carried weight, and the tension was palpable. The young man drew on all his training, all his experience, and all the lessons learned from his father. He observed carefully, anticipated the next move, and acted decisively when called upon. His actions were fluid, measured, and precise, reflecting the discipline and perseverance that had been built over years. The surgeon's eyes, sharp and evaluating, showed the first signs of respect, an acknowledgement that the young man could handle the pressure. As the surgery progressed, another complication arose. This time it required an immediate ethical decision, something that could alter the outcome of the operation. The young man recognized a potential risk, one that could save the patient if handled carefully, but also carried the possibility of criticism if it went wrong. For a moment, hesitation crept in. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. He closed his eyes briefly and remembered the promise, the sacrifices of his father, and the years of effort. He made the decision to act carefully but confidently. His hands were steady, his voice calm, and his instructions clear. The surgeon noticed the choice. It's a mixture of surprise and respect passing over his features. The rest of the surgery required complete focus. The young man stayed alert, anticipating needs, assisting seamlessly, maintaining composure even as the patient's condition fluctuated. He realized that he was no longer just a student learning from others. He was an active participant, making critical contributions. Each movement, each decision, was guided by both knowledge and moral responsibility. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what he had worked for. And he was rising to meet the challenge. After hours of intense work, the surgery concluded successfully. The team breathed a collective sigh of relief. The patient was stable, and the procedure had been a success. The young man felt exhaustion, but it was mixed with a profound sense of accomplishment. He had faced a moment that could have overwhelmed him, and he had acted with confidence, skill, and integrity. The promise from his father had been fulfilled in a tangible, meaningful way. The surgeon, usually reserved in praise, gave a measured acknowledgement. He spoke directly to the young man, saying that his insight, decisiveness, and composure had been instrumental in the positive outcome. The words were few, but heavy with significance. It was recognition from someone who had once seemed untouchable, someone whose approval mattered greatly. The young man felt a quiet pride, knowing that years of effort and resilience had led to this moment. In the days that followed, the young man's role in the hospital subtly shifted. Colleagues treated him with increased respect, seeking his input and trusting his judgment. The surgeon began to test him with more complex cases, observing how he handled stress, made decisions, and balanced technical skill with compassion. Each challenge was met with the same calm confidence, guided by knowledge, preparation, and the ethical framework he had developed over years. He realized that the promise from his father was not just about facing individuals, it was about facing life itself, with all its uncertainty, pressure, and responsibility. Outside the hospital, he continued to visit his father, sharing experiences and reflecting on the lessons of the past. His father listened quietly, pride evident in his eyes, but never overly boastful. The young man knew that his father's influence had shaped every decision, every choice, and every moment of courage. The small apartment, the long nights, the sacrifices, all of it had built a foundation strong enough to face even the most intimidating challenges. The young man also began to mentor other students and interns. He shared not just knowledge, but the lessons he had learned about patience, resilience, and ethical responsibility. He emphasized the importance of integrity in decision-making and the quiet courage required to act correctly under pressure. His guidance was practical, human, and relatable, rooted in lived experience rather than theory. He wanted others to understand that skill alone was not enough. Character and perseverance were equally essential. There were still moments of self-doubt, but they were fewer and less paralyzing. He had learned to observe, reflect, and act with clarity. He understood that mistakes were part of growth. But hesitation and fear were obstacles that could be overcome with focus and courage. The memory of his father's promise was always with him, a reminder that he could stand tall regardless of circumstance. As weeks turned into months, the young man's reputation grew further. Patients trusted him, colleagues valued his insight, and the surgeon increasingly relied on his judgment. Yet he remained humble, understanding that every success was built on effort, learning, and moral responsibility. He continued to act with empathy, ensuring that his technical decisions were always balanced by human care. He also began to see the broader impact of his work. Each patient saved, each challenge overcome, was a testament not only to his own skill, but to the values instilled by his father. He realized that his journey was about more than recognition or achievement. It was about using his abilities to make a difference in the lives of others. The promise had transformed into a living guide, shaping not only his courage, but his purpose. The surgeon, once an intimidating figure, became both a mentor and a mirror. Through the challenges presented in the operating room, the young man learned to handle pressure, make ethical decisions, and act with confidence. He recognized that true respect was earned through consistent action, skill, and integrity, and that leadership in medicine required more than authority, required wisdom, empathy, and courage. One evening, after a long day in the hospital, the young man walked home slowly. Reflecting on the months that had passed, he thought about the journey from a small apartment, a hard-working father, and the promise that had guided him through every trial. He understood that every challenge, every setback, and every success had been preparing him for this moment. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, pride, and purpose. Knowing that he had honored his father's words and had grown into the person capable of standing tall in any situation, as he looked forward, he knew that greater challenges awaited. Complex cases, critical decisions, and high-stakes situations would continue to test him. But he also knew that he was ready. He had learned to act with skill, think with clarity, and face life with unwavering courage. The promise from his father was no longer just a memory. It was the foundation of his character and the guiding principle for the life he was building in the hospital. Life continued with its rhythm of pressure, learning, and service. The young man moved with confidence, observed with care, and acted with purpose. He had become more than a student. He was a practitioner of medicine, a learner and teacher. A person who had faced fear, challenge, and uncertainty and emerged stronger. He had fulfilled the promise in action, not just words, and he carried it forward, ready for whatever the future might bring.